Hello everyone, welcome to Akademi Ekonometri. In economics course, we will continue with week 3 part 2. As you remember from the previous part, we covered the demand side, and now we are going to cover the supply side, and finally we will combine these two parts, and then we will do some analysis and try to understand the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Let's start with supply. First of all, as we did in the demand side, we will define the quantity supplied and the supply, and I will try to explain the difference between the change in quantity supplied and the change in supply. Let's define the quantity supplied first. It is the amount of goods or services that producers are willing and able to sell at the current price. So basically there is a specific price, and on that price the producers are selling a specific amount, and that's called the quantity supplied. Law of supply, as we did in the demand side, now we are defining a law related to supply, and we will call that law of supply. All other things equal, there's a direct relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. So basically when the price of a good increases, that means the quantity supplied will increase too. So when I say direct relationship, you need to understand that it's a positive relationship. When price increases, the quantity supplied is going to increase, or when price decreases, the quantity supplied will decrease. As we did in the demand side, now we are trying to define the schedule, the curve, and the market supply. What's supply schedule? The supply schedule is the table showing the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. And if we want to put these numbers on a graphic, we will create the supply curve, which is a graph of the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. And if you want to calculate the market supply using the quantity supplied coming from each producer, we need to horizontally sum all of the individual quantities supplied by each producer in the market at each price. Let's start with only single firm, and the firm we are going to talk about right now is Pure Food Fish, and the good we want to care about right now is salmon fillet. As you can see on the first column, we have the price of salmon fillet, which has the salmon fillet quantity supplied on the second column. As you can see, there's a direct relationship or a positive relationship between the price and the quantity, because higher price is related to higher quantity supplied, and lower price is related to lower quantity supplied. So this is the demand schedule for one firm only. Let's imagine if we have only two firms in our market, we can calculate the market supply by summing up the quantity supplied coming from each firm on a specific price, on each price level. So for example, when the price of salmon fillet is $15, the first firm is producing 600 and the second firm is producing 150. So the market supply on that price should be 750. If we do the same calculation for all price levels, we will find the market supply and the supply schedule for the market, because the first column is the price and the last column is showing me the quantity supplied. Also, I can do the same calculation on the graphic. On the left hand side, we have the second firm. On the middle, we have the first firm that we were talking. And if we horizontally sum the graphics, we will get the market supply. And as you can see from here, the market supply, the slope of the market supply is a little bit flatter than the previous two firms' market supplies. Now let's cover the shifts in supply. We will first start with movement along a supply curve, as we did in the demand side. A movement along a supply curve will be caused by a change in the price of the good only. So when there's a change in the price of the good, the supply curve will stay intact. It's not going to change. Only we will move on that specific supply curve. So we know from the law of supply there's a direct relationship between the price and the quantity. That's why when the price increases, the quantity supplied will increase. So we will move on the same supply curve, but the point where we are will change only. The shift in the supply curve will be caused by non-price factors. Entire supply curve will shift to left or right. As you remember from the demand side, we did the same kind of analogy. So remember, I said when there's a change in demand and when there's a change in quantity demanded, these two things are not the same. The second one, the movement or the change in the quantity demanded happens only when there's a change in the price, as we have in the supply right now. And the change in this demand happens only when we have a change in non-price factors, as we have in supply right now. So the most important thing you need to remember here is when there is a change in non-price factors, our supply curve will shift. So the structure of the supply curve will change. We will not be on the same supply curve anymore. But when there is a change in the price of that good we are talking about, we will be on the same supply curve, but on a different point. Let me elaborate what I'm trying to tell you. So I will draw a regular supply curve here. On the x-axis I have quantity, on the y-axis I have price. Let's say the price of that good, and let's say the good is x, the price of that good is increasing. Initially we were at this point px1, and then when there is an increase, after the increase, the price of the good is px2. So the initial quantity supplied is qx1 and the final is qx2. As you can see, we are on the same supply curve. The structure of the supply has not been changed yet. So basically, what we did in the demand, I'm going to do the same thing. So the structure of the supply depends on several things. Let's say tax. I'm going to cover these parts later, and input prices, number of sellers, future price expectations, these kind of things. So all of the non-price factors, which are those, they are just the same. That's why we will have the same supply curve. What is changing is the price only. That's why the quantity supplied is increasing. And this kind of movement is actually a change in quantity supplied. However, when a non-price factor changes, the supply can shift to right. We will call that shift right or up, the same thing, or left or down. So let's say S1, S2, S3. So from S1 to S2, supply is increasing, it's shifting right or up. From S1 to S3, it's shifting to left or down. I know it seems that it's going up when we are shifting from S1 to S3, but the idea is when we move from S1 to S3, the supply is decreasing. That's why we call it down. That's why we call it up here. So in this situation, we call that these kind of movements are change in supply. And as you can see, it's totally different than the change in quantity supplied. Here, in the change in quantity supplied, only the price is changing. It's going down or up. But in the change in supply, maybe the tax is changing, maybe input price is changing, or the number of sellers, or the future price expectations. So that's the difference that you have to know. Now let me show the shift in supply in a better graphic. As you know from the previous spreadsheet or the graphics I did on my spreadsheet, if you move from S1 to S3, the supply is decreasing, and the economic event here is a hurricane that destroys Colombian coffee crop, causes sellers to produce less coffee. So basically, something happened, and this thing affected the production process. We know that the supply is related to this production process. We have all of the information about the production process in the supply curve. So basically, supply has affected. That's why it's decreasing, and we will say it's shifting to left or down. On the other side, supply can increase. Here, a new way to brew a rich coffee at half the cost. So basically, the suppliers, producers, they find a new way. Maybe they have a better technology. So that better technology helps producers to produce that coffee for a half cost. So their cost structure totally change, which will affect the production process. So the supply is increasing, and it will shift from S1 to S2, and we will call that is an increase in supply, and the supply will shift to right or down, or up, I'm sorry. The next topic is supply shifters. Remember, we did shifters, we covered the shifters for demand, and now we will cover the shifters for supply. The idea is going to be the same, but of course the shifters, the types will be a little bit different. In the supply, we will care mostly about the production process. That's why we will start with the cost of the inputs, or the input price. So inputs are really important because that is going to affect how much money you need to spend to produce that good, or the input price is really important. So that's why there's an inverse relationship between the input costs and the supply curve. For example, you're producing, let's say you're producing a chocolate, and every time you're in your production process, you need the chocolate beans. If the price of the chocolate beans increases, that means your production cost is increasing, which is going to negatively affect the production process, and the supply will decrease, and the supply curve will shift to left. There is an inverse relationship. If the input costs decreases, it will decrease the cost of the production process, and the supply curve will shift to right because supply is increasing. Changes in the technology. Technology, as you know before, technology helps the production process to be efficient. So an efficient production process is actually decreasing your cost. So here the technology is actually related to the cost of the production process. If you have high technology, that means you're producing that good efficiently, which creates low cost. Low cost means more supply. So high technology means more supply, and the supply curve will shift to right, or low technology means that low supply, and the supply curve will shift to left. So there's a direct relationship between the level of technology and the supply. The third one is taxes and the subsidies. Remember, as a producer, let's imagine that you're the producer, and every month, every year, when you do a production, you have to pay tax to your government. So that's a rule in all of the countries. If you're doing production, you have to pay tax. And that tax is actually kind of a cost that you have to pay every month in your production process. Basically, when the government increased the tax, for example, from 10% to 20%, your cost structure is changing, or you have to pay more money to produce that good. So if your cost is increasing, I told you before, the supply should decrease, and it's going to shift the supply to left. So basically, there's an inverse relationship between the tax and supply. If the tax rate is decreasing, supply will increase, and the supply will shift to right. Subsidy is just the opposite of the tax. Government pays sellers to produce goods in the subsidy. The reason of paying money to producers is to protect the producers, because if the good we are talking about is kind of a really important good, for example, agricultural product, a government, for example, doesn't want to be dependent on other countries in producing that good, that agricultural product. So to protect the farmers of that good, government is giving some money to support them in the production process. So basically, subsidy, in the simplistic term, subsidy is just the opposite of the tax. Instead of getting money from them and increasing the cost of producers, in the subsidy case, government is paying money to the producers and decreasing the cost of the production process for producers. So basically, there's a direct relationship between the subsidy and supply. If the subsidy amount increases, the producers will have less cost in the production process, which will give incentive them to produce more, and the supply will increase. So when subsidy increases, supply will increase and the supply will shift to right. And in the opposite direction, when subsidy decreases, supply will shift to left because supply is decreasing. The number 4 is number of sellers. When we have more sellers in the market, that means more supply. That's why when the number of sellers increases, the supply will increase and the supply will shift to right. Number 5, price expectations. Remember, we did the future price expectations in the demand part, and in that case, you imagined yourself as a consumer. But right now, since we are talking about supply, you have to imagine yourself, or you have to put yourself in the eye of producer. So let's say the good you are selling right now is $100. And in the future, you expect to see a price tag of $150. So you expect to see a high price in the future. So as a producer, you want to make more money. That's why instead of selling today, you want to sell your product tomorrow. So basically, the price, or basically there's a positive price expectation for tomorrow, high price expectation for tomorrow. That's why you're decreasing your supply today, because you want to sell tomorrow. So the idea is there's an inverse relationship between tomorrow's expected price and today's supply. Remember, we are trying to understand what happens to today's supply, not to tomorrow's supply. And if we look from the opposite direction, let's say the price of the good currently is $100, and in the near future, you expect to see a price tag of $50. You don't want to lose money, because if you sell your product in the future, you're going to lose money. That's why you want to sell all of your products today. When there is a decrease in the tomorrow's expected price, you want to sell more today. Again, there's an inverse relationship. And this inverse relationship basically shifts the supply either to right or left. On this slide, I want to summarize all of the shifters that can happen. So my advice again is to not to memorize this slide, but try to understand the shifters first. And when there is a question in the exam or in the problem sets, you can immediately answer the question without even memorizing this slide. Let's do some practice questions. Assume the price of cheese decreases. What will happen in the pizza market? First of all, we know that the cheese is an ingredient in pizza. It's an input. And the input price here is decreasing. So the cost of producing pizza is decreasing. So this will increase the supply. And I know that that increase is not coming directly, that decrease is not coming directly from the pizza price. It's coming from the input price. That's why it's a shifter. And the answer should be A. The supply of pizza increases. The other question is, which of the following will cause the supply curve for oranges to shift to left? Shifting left is basically a decrease in the supply. So we want to find a situation, a condition which will cause supply to decrease. The government begins subsidizing orange growers. this will increase the supply. B, a study showing oranges improve eyesight. This option B is actually related to demand, not the supply, because when people know that oranges improve eyesight, people tend to buy more of that good. Demand will increase, not the supply. Option C, ice storm strikes Florida. So in Florida, there are a lot of oranges producers. So when there is an ice storm in Florida, it will affect the production process. It will hurt badly the production process in Florida. So that's why the supply will decrease. It will shift to left. The correct answer should be C. But let's see option D. A new orange juice commercial airs on TV. This is related to demand. This will affect the preferences of the consumers. That's why it's not going to shift supply, but it will shift the demand. Now, right now we are going to bring supply and demand together, and we will try to understand how we generate this equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity in the market. So how is the price of a good determined in the market? The market forces, which are supply and demand, will work simultaneously to determine the price. And if we decided on the specific price by using the supply and the demand forces simultaneously, we can also decide on the equilibrium or the market quantity. The law of supply and the law of demand gives me some information about the price and the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. So the equilibrium price will adjust to balance the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. And after their balance, after they're equal, the price will set and we will know the equilibrium quantity in the market. So what I mean is, remember, before we draw our demand curve, right now I'm going to draw a regular demand curve that we did before. This is our price and this is the quantity and the supply is here. And as you can see, the intersection of those 2 points, those 2 curves, will give me the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And that point, we generally denote that point as E because it is the equilibrium point. That's the equilibrium point or the market equilibrium, the same thing. At this quantity, equilibrium quantity, we know that the quantity demanded, I will denote it as QD, and the quantity supplied, they are just the same. So there are, let's say, 1,000 quantity supplied and 1,000 quantity demanded, and they are bought and sold in this market. So the market is clearing itself. There is no more extra to buy. There is no more extra to sell in that market. Because on that market clearing price, the QD, quantity demanded, and the quantity supplied is just the same. There is no leftover in the market. So that's why sometimes we call the equilibrium price as the market clearance price, or the price that clears the market. The same thing. Equilibrium point, as I told you before, graphically the intersection of supply and demand. Equilibrium price, the price that causes quantity supply to equal quantity demanded. That price clears the market. It's the market clearing price. And the equilibrium quantity is a numerical quantity, supplied and demanded. They are just the same, quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. And this quantity needs to be at the equilibrium price. So the next one is the graph of shifts. We covered the equilibrium, market equilibrium price, market equilibrium quantity, but we want to know what's going to happen when demand shifts only, for example, when supply shifts only, or what happens when both demand and supply shift simultaneously. We want to understand what's going to happen to price, equilibrium price, and the equilibrium quantity after these shifts. And let's start. Right now, we will just shift only one curve. For example, we are only shifting demand, we are only shifting supply. And I will give you all the possible situations. Right now, in this graphic, in the first graphic, I'm increasing the demand only. Demand is increasing for a reason. Let's say we are talking about a normal good and your income is increasing. That's why demand will increase from D1 to D2. And here, the initial equilibrium point is E1, and after the change in the demand, the final equilibrium point is E2. As you can see from the graphic, price is increasing compared to previous equilibrium point, and the quantity is increasing compared to previous equilibrium point. When we increase the supply, the things a little bit change. So the initial equilibrium point is E1, the final equilibrium point is E2. After supply increases in this case, the price is decreasing and the quantity is increasing. As you can see from these both graphics, the change in the price and the change in the quantity is certain. It's not ambiguous. So you can say a certain thing. I can say certainly the price, for example, in the first graphic, the price is increasing and the quantity is increasing. So I'm explaining this part because when we change both curves at the same time or simultaneously, the change in one of these parts will be ambiguous. We will cover that in a couple slides later. And in these two graphics, instead of increasing demand or supply, we are decreasing demand or supply. And again, price and the quantity is changing, and the change in these two parts are actually certain. We can say something certainly about these changes. But the problem starts when we change supply and demand simultaneously. Because in the real world, we generally tend to understand what happens to supply and the demand simultaneously, and these shifts, these changes are happening simultaneously. The real world is not that simple. It's complex, and generally shifts happen simultaneously. So we care about the simultaneous shifts. That's why we will, for example, increase the supply and increase the demand, and we want to analyze what happens to equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Now, to explain the simultaneous shifts better to you, I am going to use an example. And in this example, let's consider the market for salmon, and suppose two things happen simultaneously. The first of those is a major drought hits the Northwest United States. And this major drought is going to decrease the supply of salmon. You might ask, how the drought is related to supply of salmon? Apparently, it is related because the fish cannot find enough food, I guess. So that's why, because of the first event, we have a decrease in the supply of salmon. So salmon will decrease to left. In the second part, a medical journal reports that people who consume salmon live longer than people who eat other fish. So basically, the preference and taste towards salmon will change for consumers, and they will tend to increase their demand for salmon. As a result, an increase in the demand for salmon happens. So basically, we have two different shifts. And let's do these shifts separately first, and we will combine the shifts. In the left hand side, we have the shift in supply only. Remember, first result was a decrease in supply. So that's why we will start from that point E1. This is our initial equilibrium point, and this is our initial supply curve, initial demand curve, and we will decrease the supply. But the problem with the first result is that we don't know the magnitude of that decrease. We know that the supply is going to decrease for sure, but we don't know the magnitude. Supply might decrease a little bit, and the final supply might be here. Or in the other extreme case, supply might decrease a lot and the final supply might be here. So we don't know the final supply or the place of the final supply. That's why we are going to use all of these possible lines. In the demand side, we have the same problem. We know that the demand is increasing, but we don't know the magnitude of the increase. So the final demand line might be somewhere here, or somewhere at the middle, or somewhere at the top. So basically, we are going to use all of these supply lines as the possible, all of the demand lines as the possible results. When we combine these possible results, we will see that my possible final equilibrium point might be on that purple triangle. It might be anywhere on that purple triangle. And as you can see, if, for example, the final equilibrium point here, I can tell you that the price is increasing for sure compared to E1, but the quantity demanded or the market quantity is decreasing. However, when the equilibrium point is here, somewhere here, I know that the price is again increasing, but in this case, the equilibrium quantity is increasing. So we cannot say a certain result or certain thing about the change in equilibrium quantity. But what we can say is equilibrium price is increasing for sure. As you can see, when we change the both curves simultaneously, we can say a certain thing about one part, either price or the quantity, and we cannot say a certain thing about the another one. So in general, when you open books, you will see that the change in price is certain, but the change in quantity is ambiguous. People use that word generally, ambiguous, or the change in price is unambiguous, change in quantity is ambiguous. And this is going to happen all the time when you change both curves simultaneously. Let me give you another example. For example, in this case, demand is increasing, supply is increasing as well. If you increase both of the curves at the same time, as you can see, the final equilibrium point is happening on that purple triangle again. On that purple triangle, I can easily see that the quantity demanded is increasing for sure. So that's why the change in quantity demanded, or the change in equilibrium quantity, is unambiguous. It's certain. But the change in equilibrium price is ambiguous. Let's see another example. And in this example, the demand is decreasing, supply is decreasing as well. And in this case, the change in quantity is unambiguous and the change in equilibrium price is ambiguous again. You might want to see the other two examples as well. The results is going to be the same. So basically, the end result that you need to remember is when I change only one curve, the change in equilibrium price and the change in the equilibrium quantity will be certain, unambiguous. But when we change both curves simultaneously, the change in equilibrium price and the change in equilibrium quantity, for one part we will say it will be ambiguous, and the other part we will say it will be unambiguous. So far we covered a lot of shifts, and I wanted to summarize all of the shifts and their results in the slide. But of course, I don't advise you to memorize this slide. Instead, draw the graphic every time for each correct question, make the shift, and understand the result. So that's my advice, not the previous slide. In this slide, I want to show you a small video clip. And in that video clip, it's about the Chocolate Factory movie. This is the previous version, or the first version of that movie. And in that movie, there's kind of a market effect happening. And that's because of that market effect, people tend to buy more of that chocolate goods, and then price of the candy is increasing. But unfortunately, I cannot show you this video clip because of the copyright problems coming from YouTube to me. After you watch that video clip, you will see that little kids are trying to buy that chocolate bar a lot because they want to get into the chocolate factory, which is a kind of a mysterious place. So they are trying to find that golden ticket to get into that chocolate factory. And to find the golden ticket, they are buying a lot of that good. So basically, the preferences are changed, and consumers are buying more of that good, and the demand is shifting to right. That's why the price and the quantity in the market is increasing. The next topic we are going to cover is shortage and surplus. Let's start with shortage. Shortage happens when the quantity demanded is higher than the quantity supplied. Shortage occurs at any price below equilibrium level, and when the market deregulated again, price level will rise over time toward the equilibrium level. So I want to explain shortage by using our regular demand and the supply analysis. This is our regular demand and the supply. We have price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. And let's say the market is at equilibrium right now. So the price is PE and the quantity, the equilibrium quantity is QE. And we know that at this equilibrium quantity, QD, quantity demanded, and QS, quantity supplied, they are just the same. That's why PE is the market clearing price. It clears the market. But let's say right now the market is free. The government is not regulating the market, which means that government is not involving about the price level, which is freely set up by the supply and the demand forces. But sometimes government wants to increase or decrease the price level. So the reason for changing the current free market price level is to protect either demanders or suppliers. We will see that part of the topic in week 5. But for now, let's assume that the government is changing the price. So government is regulating the market. We call regulated when government involves in the price decision in the market. Basically, government is forcing the market to sell and buy that product on a given specific price, which is of course defined by the government. So for now, let's say that the government wants to have a lower price. And this price is, let's say, P1. At P1 price level, we know that because when we go from the price level to the supply line, we know that this will be my quantity supplied. And I labeled it as QS1. And when I go to demand, this will be the quantity demanded at that specific price. That's why I label it QD1. And on this price level, I know that there's a gap between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. And this gap here is called shortage. We call it shortage because there are lots of demanders in the market, but there is not enough suppliers in the market. And this happened because the government regulated the market. Remember the invisible hand theory. According to Adam Smith, the invisible hand finds the market clearance price, and this price will ensure that the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied is just the same. And this is happening by using the supply and the demand forces freely. This happens when the market is free. But when the government regulates the market, we have a situation, at least in this case, which is written in blue, QD1 is higher than the QS1. So this means we have a shortage. And right now I want to explain the surplus case too. I will show the slides. in a couple minutes, but let's cover the surplus case as well. So let's say this time, instead of having a lower price than the equilibrium price, this time government, let's say, wants to have a higher price level, which we will say that P2. At P2 price level, when we go down, we know that this will be the quantity demanded, QD2, because we hit the demand line here. And on this point, we hit the supply line. That's why we say this will be QS2. In this case, QS2 is higher than the QD2. So there are lots of suppliers than the demanders in the market. So there are lots of product which is still waiting to be sold. That's why we have surplus in this market. And we call this gap surplus. Now let's turn back to the slides. And as you see here, on this third line, price will rise over time toward equilibrium if the market is not regulated. I'm going to explain this sentence in detail, but let's see the surplus first. As I told you before, surplus happens when the quantity supplied is higher than the quantity demanded, and it occurs at price above equilibrium level. Price which is above the equilibrium level, we have surplus. Price which is below the equilibrium level, that's why we have shortage. Now let's cover why the price level will go to equilibrium price level if the market is not regulated. So this is a fancier graphic, but really similar to what I drew before. And let's start with the shortage case. I told you that when the price is regulated by the government, and if it is below the equilibrium level, we will have a shortage, as you can see here. The amount of the shortage at $5 price level is 750 minus 250, which is 500 shortage. So that means there are 500 consumers in the market who wants to buy that good, but unfortunately there isn't enough good. So let's assume that after the government regulated this market for a while, they decided not to regulate the market again. So they free the market. What happens when the market becomes free again? Remember, while the government was regulating the market, price was 5, and then they suddenly decided not to regulate it. So what's going to happen? I told you that the price will go up eventually, and it will converge to $10, and the final equilibrium point will be at point E again. Why is that? The background story is at $5 price level, we know that there are lots of buyers in the market. They want to buy that good. But unfortunately, since the price level is so low, suppliers are supplying less compared to the point E, because we know that law of supply says that when price goes down, quantity supplied goes down too. So if one consumer in this market, in this kind of situation, if one consumer tells the supplier, hey, I know you want to sell this product for more price, so why don't you give me this product for $6 instead of $5? So these suppliers will sell the good to this kind of consumers. And after that, one more consumer will come up and will say that I can pay $7. And one another will come and he or she will say, I can pay $8. And this convergence will continue until we see a price level which is $10. And whenever we see a price level which is $10, this convergence will stop, because after about this point E, the convergence will not follow, because we know that the supply and the demand forces will create that equilibrium price when they are free. because they intersect at that point E. And the same story happens in the surplus side. In the surplus side, we know that quantity supplied is higher than the quantity demanded. That means there are lots of suppliers in the market and they cannot sell their product. So eventually, one of them will say, instead of selling their good for $15, they will say, okay, I'm going to sell the good for $14 because the market is free right now. I can sell. And then one supplier come again, and he or she will say that, okay, I will sell the good for $13, $11, and then finally the convergence will end at $10, and the market will become in the equilibrium again. So one important point that I forgot to explain you while explaining shortage and surplus is, right now, when the government, let's say right now we start at point E, the market is free, government doesn't involve in the price decision, but when the government regulate the market, we call these kind of markets as regulated markets. And when the market is regulated, some price levels will become illegal. For example, let's say the free price level is $10 and the government regulated the market and said that the maximum price level in this market can be $5. That's why we see $5 here, and in this market, the transaction can happen only on $5 or below $5. No price tag can exist in this market above $5. For example, nobody can sell this product for $5.01. $6 is illegal. $5.02 it's illegal. All of the price tags above $5 is illegal. In the other side, for example, on the other side, when government says that I want a price level which is at least $15, that means you cannot sell this product below $15. $14.99 is illegal, $15 is legal, $15.01 is legal. We are going to cover the details of these kind of price controls in week 5, but for now, this is the only part that you need to know. You need to know how shortage happens, you need to know how surplus happens, and you need to know how does the price converge to the initial equilibrium or free market equilibrium level. And in this slide, I'm showing you an interesting video clip, which is about bartering. This is the simplistic case of doing trade. In USA, they have a lot of pawn shops. For example, you have a valuable item and you want to sell that item to pawn shop. They offer you some money. So basically, the supply and demand forces just interact. They decide on a specific price, they agree on a specific price, and they make the transaction. Why am I showing you this video? The main reason is the pawn shop is the demanders actually, and you are the supplier in this case, and you make the bargaining and you decide on a specific price. So this is kind of equilibrium price and the equilibrium demand, equilibrium quantity in the market. You can watch this video in your spare time, but unfortunately I cannot show this video to you because of YouTube copyright claims. Let's turn back to the slides. I will skip the conclusion and the summary parts because I have talked a lot about this topic. So I want to do the practice questions right away. The first practice question is, suppose the price of good X increases. In terms of demand, what is the result? We know that when the price changes, this is a change in quantity demanded only. So the demand line will stay the same, stay intact, and we will make a movement along the demand curve only. That's why the correct answer should be about the quantity demanded, and we know that law of demand says that price and the quantity demanded has an inverse relationship. That's why when we see increase here, there should be a decrease. So the correct answer should be option D. The next question is, suppose goods X and Y are substitutes for each other. If the price of good Y increases, what is the result in the market for good X? So instead of using X and Y, I want to give them some specific product names. Let's say X is Pepsi and Y is Coca-Cola. And the price of Coca-Cola is increasing. If this is the case, you are going to decrease the quantity demanded in the Coca-Cola market. So basically, you're not getting caffeine from that market, but you have to get that caffeine. You have to get that beverage demand from some other market. That's why you go to the Pepsi market. And in the Pepsi market, of course, you have to increase the demand because the change in price in Coca-Cola market will be considered as the change in demand. So that's why the demand line for Pepsi market will change, and we will say that the demand for X increasing because you have to get more caffeine from the Pepsi market, at least in our example. That's why the result or the answer should be A. The next question is, suppose there's a shortage in the market for avocados. Assuming a competitive and unrestrained market, unregulated market, what happens over time? Actually, we covered that like a couple minutes ago. The shortage means that quantity demanded is higher than the quantity supplied. So basically, the price level is below the equilibrium level. And when the market becomes unregulated again, of course, the price will go up, price will rise, and eventually the market will clear itself. The market will be in the equilibrium. That's why the answer should be option B. The next question is, consider the market for bananas. Suppose that both the supply and demand for bananas increase simultaneously. Which of these effects are certain? So let's draw these changes. The question says that supply and the demand for bananas are increasing simultaneously. So this is our demand and supply. Let's label them as S1 and D1. This E1 is our initial equilibrium point, and P1 is the initial price, Q1 is the initial quantity. And then demand is shifting from D1 to D2, and the supply is shifting to S1 to S2 because the question is asking us what happens to the price and the quantity when both curves shifts to right or both curves increase. So in this case, it's really obvious that the quantity is increasing. As I told you before, if the change in one part, the parts I'm talking about are price and the quantity. If the change in one part is certain, the change in the other part is uncertain or ambiguous. So the certainty I have here is in quantity. So the quantity is increasing, but the change in price is not certain. Let's turn back to the answers. So in option C, the equilibrium quantity of bananas will increase, will be the correct one. Let's check option A. It's about prices. We cannot say anything certain about price. Option D, the equilibrium quantity of bananas will decrease, which is totally wrong. So option C should be the correct answer. So we came to the end of week 3. And next week, we will cover elasticities. We will cover the elasticity of demand and supply and also other kind of elasticities. This is the end of week 3. Thank you for watching Akademi Ekonometri. Please remember to subscribe the channel and like the video. I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.